All right, what were Dad and Craig like as children, and what are some things you love about them?
Okay, Danny was born liking people. From the time he was a toddler and an only child for 6 years, he loved people. Little people, big people, old people, didn't make him any difference. He had elderly people that loved him like their own.
Mm-hmm.
When he started kindergarten, his teacher's name was Mrs. Nass, and he actually started kindergarten before his 4th birthday. He started in September, and his birthday wasn't until October. In the back of that kindergarten class was the play area, and girls' playthings was on this side, and boys' playthings were on this side. And usually, Mrs. Nass said almost always the girls played on this side and the boys played on this side until Danny Garrison got to kindergarten, and he had everybody playing together.
Did he really?
There wasn't a girl's side and a boy's side. Everybody played together. She said he was the only kindergartner she ever had that could do that. And she had taught kindergarten a lot of years. And then that was kindergarten. And then before that, there's one little story I need to tell you about Danny at church. He always loved going to church. And after he got 4 years old, he sat out in the congregation area. He didn't go to the nursery. And he was sitting out there one Sunday, and he was doodling, coloring or something on a sheet of paper. And we had a guest minister that Sunday. Our regular minister was very soft-spoken and never raised his voice. Well, this guest minister was Brother Johnson, was his name, and he preached hell and damnation loudly.
Oh, man.
So he was up there preaching, and he ended a sentence with the word hell. It was quiet as could be in that church. This was a rather big church. Danny never looked up. He just continued doodling down here, and he said loudly, hell, 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 3 times.
Oh, no.
Broke up the whole church.
Did people laugh?
Oh, yes, yes.
That's funny.
That word, that was a new word to him, and it stuck in his little brain.
Oh, no.
So that happened.
You gotta tell him about Danny's basketball game at Greenbrier.
With the bottle?
Oh, with the bottle. Oh, yeah, that was when he was a baby and still on the bottle, and we went to Greenbrier to a basketball game, and their bleachers was up kind of high. You know, there was a wall, and then the bleachers started. And he was just laying back as calm as, he was always a calm child. He didn't have any temper, was real easy to discipline when he was little. He was just laying back there drinking his bottle, and he just left that bottle in that hand like that, and he let that hand go down, and before I could catch it, that bottle started going down those bleachers, and it hit the edge of every bleacher and jumped over that wall during a basketball game, ongoing, went out to center court. The lid came off of it, and it spun around like spinning a bottle, and milk poured out of the bottle.
It's like worst case scenario.
Danny doesn't remember that, and that was a baby thing. But he always had a lot of friends. He just loved people, and people loved him. When he was 14 or younger, he always went to church. When David worked midnight shift and came home and slept, he always went to church with me. Never, that was just like going to school. We went to church. He was a junior deacon in church, and he helped serve communion when he was 14 years old, and had all of the old people in church just loved him to death. When David first moved to Kansas City and was on extra board when he was working all those jobs all over the place, there was an old man that lived next door to us that had a stump. He had cut down a tree in his backyard, and he would ask if Danny could come sit in his lap, and he would sit on that stump and feed birds. Birds would just birds would just flock all around them. And that old man loved that kid to death. And every day there was a park right across the street from our house, the city park, and it had a drinking fountain on the far side. So every day he took that child to that drinking fountain. You know how little kids like to drink out of a drinking fountain. Walked him through that park to that drinking fountain and then back to the house. When he was in kindergarten, first grade, I think he was first grade by this time, we lived by another elderly couple. Somehow in Danny's life, there's always been a lot of elderly people that loved him like their own. There was an elderly couple that lived next door, and he went to kindergarten. He was in kindergarten because he went to kindergarten in the mornings. It was a half-day kindergarten. So he walked home. We lived on the street with the school, so I would stand out on the sidewalk, and I could see him. It was about 4 blocks, but I could see where he turned into the school, and I could see him walking down the sidewalk. And he sang every day, walking home from kindergarten, "Glory, glory, hallelujah," that song.
Aww.
And that old man every day went on the front porch at 11:30 to hear that kid sing coming down that sidewalk. So he's always had people like that in his life. And then his jobs he's had where he doesn't have to sit down at a desk all day. That drives him nuts. And he was always like that, though. He just, in school, he played basketball with like Marvin Delf and several other black kids that were really good ball players at Conway High School. They really had good teams back then. And some of them didn't have very much money. And Danny didn't have a lot of money, but if he had a little money in his pocket, he took them home from practice every day because he had a car to drive. And he took them home after school, and they would stop and get a Coke at a drive-in, and he would pay for everybody to have a Coke. If he had $1 quarter, everybody that was with him had a part of that quarter. That was always what he was like.
He's still like that.
He couldn't stand for somebody not to have what he had. He loved clothes. He actually kept his room. You might not believe this, but he had the cleanest room in high school. He made his bed every day before he went to school. There were no clothes around anywhere. Everything was hung up, and he could make a bed as good as I could. So he was always that way. And when he went to college, he furnished all of the soap, shampoo, toiletries for there were 4 of them that was in a quad in his dorm. He furnished, I bought more soap and toothpaste and washing powder than you could believe that year. He furnished all of that. He was always helpful, a helpful soul. So that was Danny. Greg was completely different personality. Greg was a really pretty newborn. He had jet black hair, about that long, all over his head, and blue-eyed when he was born. And he was filled out more. He was a bigger baby than Danny was. And he did so many funny things. Like he had an analytical mind from the get-go, where Danny had a people person. He was a people person. Greg was wanting to know what made things work, like give him an old clock and let him tear it apart and look inside it. When he was 5, I believe it was, David had barber, what do you call the clippers? Clippers. Electric barber clippers out in the garage. So Greg was out in the garage one day, and I was in the kitchen cooking, and he walks in the kitchen, and he had run those clippers. He was coal black-headed, right down the top of his head to the scalp. So he had the width of the clippers right down the top of his head. We had to shave his head, clip his head completely.
Oh, no.
He did that. One
man.
day when he was about Avery's age, he must have been about 8, he had a Stingray bicycle and a regular Schwinn bicycle. Well, a Stingray bicycle has got a smaller wheel in front than it does behind. And a regular bicycle, the wheels are the same size, front and back. He got out in the garage and he took the 2 bicycles apart. And I looked out the front window. I didn't know what he was doing out there. and he was going down the street in front of the house, and he had put the little wheel off of the Stingray on the other bicycle, which made him, you know, he had all the handlebars, but that wheel was small, so he was leaning forward, pedaling down the street. He just always did that kind of thing. But he was also a junior deacon in church and served communion. And he started playing the piano in church when he was 14. Now, he made baubles, but everybody thought he was just wonderful. Those old ladies that loved them both to death thought they were just wonderful kids. If they had a cold and missed a day of school, they all knocked on the front door with orange juice, bottles of orange juice. Miss Heilman was a librarian at UCA. She was an old maid. She had never been married. So the boys mowed her yard when they were 12, 13, 14. She just, when they finished, they had to go in and drink a Coke with her. She wouldn't let them leave till they went in and drank a Coke and visited with her. She had an onyx ring that was probably pretty valuable, and she gave that to Danny before he went away to college, and he wore it.
Aw.
He laid it on his bed one day at college, and it disappeared. But he got that ring, so we don't have that ring anymore.
Yeah.
But anyway, Greg was cut out to get a degree in mechanical engineering from the get-go. And Danny was cut out to do what he's doing right now. What he's doing right now just suits him to a T.
Yep, dealing with people a lot. That's true.
They completely different personalities. They didn't fight. They actually got along pretty good. Danny was so much older. They're 6 years apart in age, but they were 7 years apart in school because of the way the birthdays fell. So you couldn't let them really hit each other. But they never wanted to. Danny never was jealous of Greg. And when he was in kindergarten and I was expecting, Mrs. Nass said, "We've never had a child that is as excited about having a brother or sister as he is." So he was never jealous of Gregory. And they just got along great. And when Danny went away to college, we left his room like it was all the time he was at ASU. And Greg stayed in his room. So Greg kept saying, "You know, I think I want to move in Danny's room. It's bigger and blah, blah, blah." And so when Danny went to South Carolina on his first job, Greg was going to move in that room. And he couldn't do it for a while. He cried. He couldn't do it. Couldn't move in there.
Greg couldn't.
Greg couldn't do it. He thought he could. He wanted this big room, you know, all the space and a bigger desk, but he couldn't
Then
do
he
it.
realized it was hard for him.
So that's kind of my story of lots of good memories of those boys when they were growing up. They were both good athletes.
We'll pause it.